On a chilly November day in 1983, the journey home for 11-year-old Lora Ann Huzar took a nightmarish turn. After staying overnight at a friend's house, Lora vanished without a trace. It wasn't until 3 days later that her body was found, casting a shadow of dread and disbelief across the community. For nearly 40 years, the enigma of Lora's disappearance and death loomed over the town like a dark specter. Yet, a decade on, a determined investigator reopened this long-cold case. Now, the pieces of this haunting puzzle are coming together, revealing the sinister truth behind Lora's tragic fate on that fateful autumn day. Join us as we unravel the mystery that has lingered for decades, finally shedding light on the darkness of that November in 1983. Lora Ann Huzar was born on May 10, 1972, to caring parents, Jose Luis Navarro and Judy Marie. Jose Luis Navarro, who was born to Raymond Huzar and Francisca Navarro Huzar on July 3, 1944, in Saltillo, Mexico, married Judy Marie Leblanc on October 29, 1966, in Oma, Michigan. According to his biography, Lora's father served in the United States Armed Forces and retired from a career as a long-haul semi-truck driver in 2000. Jose Luis Navarro was also dedicated to his community, working as a social worker for the Bay County Hispanic community. The birth of Anne was eagerly anticipated by the family, where she was the youngest sibling with 4 older brothers and sisters already looking forward to her arrival. Lora grew up in a comfortable home in St. Lucie County, Florida. Those who knew her described Lora as a daring and outspoken girl. According to her sister, Lora Ann was especially smart and resourceful. Even on the street, she showed her intelligence and independence, not giving in easily to persuasion or manipulation. Lora was far from an easy target for those who tried to take advantage of her gullibility or deceive her. Lora was in 6th grade at Chester Moore Elementary School. Everything changed on Sunday, November 6, 1983, around 1:30 p.m. On the evening of Saturday, November 5, 1983, 11-year-old Lora Ann Huzar had plans to spend the night at a friend's house in her hometown of Fort Pierce, Florida. Lora's parents felt comfortable with this arrangement. After all, they lived in a peaceful town where everyone knew each other, and they saw no danger in letting their daughter spend the night out. Confidently, they allowed Lora to go without any reservations. She was expected to walk home the next day. According to press reports, Lora stopped at the gas station and then vanished after exiting the premises. When Lora did not return home as expected, her father contacted the police. Growing increasingly worried, the parents called Lora's friend and discovered she had left her friend's house several hours earlier. At that time, authorities often did not take reports of missing teenagers seriously until they had been missing for a significant duration. A detective explained that teenagers often lose track of time while with friends, suggesting a reason for not returning home as planned. This approach, however, felt inadequate to Lora's parents, leaving them in a state of passive waiting for her return, which never came. Despite this, persistent demands from the family led to the filing of an official missing person report for Lora, underscoring the unlikely possibility of her wandering off on her own. Regrettably, a large-scale search was not initiated in the early stages of the investigation. The body of a young girl had been found in a drainage ditch located approximately 600 yards from the gas station where Huzar was last seen. Based on the records, St. Lucie County Deputy James Howard Harrison was the first law enforcement officer to arrive on the scene. He was also the last person to see Lora Huzar alive, it was later discovered. Chief Deputy Brian Hester expressed his doubts as to why Harrison did not offer to give the girl a ride. However, in light of the files, she was initially believed to have run away. The body of 11-year-old Lora Ann Huzar was discovered on November 9, 1983, in St. Lucie County, about 60 miles north of West Palm Beach. It happened 3 days after eyewitnesses claimed to have seen her being led home by a uniformed cop. It was weird because there wasn't much information available, and no one was able to verify the witnesses' claims. Her body was taken to the hospital. According to the autopsy report, Lora was assaulted and strangled to death. Experts suggested that the minor was murdered the day her parents filed a report of the missing person. Lora's family was devastated by her passing and the fact that the police never even launched a large-scale search for Lora. At the same time, their small area was shocked by this brutal crime, but it was already too late. People wanted nothing more than to find the killer who chose the little girl as her next prey. Unfortunately for them, it will be decades before the mystery is still solved. The residents of Fort Pierce, Florida, were deeply shaken, clinging to the hope that the perpetrator would soon be caught and brought to justice. The mere thought of a child stepping out into the street and being brutally murdered just a few steps from their home was terrifying. However, the initial investigation didn't meet the community's expectations. There were few leads to follow. Despite conducting several interviews, detectives struggled to find any substantive evidence to crack the case wide open. The pressing question, who was the killer, hit a dead end and remained unanswered for nearly 40 years. What have the police missed? In 2020, at the outset of the renewed investigation, Officer James Harrison had scant information. Lora had vanished near a local gas station on her way home from an overnight stay, and her father reported her missing just a few hours later. Interestingly, on November 6, 1983, the day after she went missing, Officer Harrison did observe a young girl carrying clothes near the area of Lora's disappearance, but thought little of it, assuming she had run away from home. The case had initially been closed back in 1983, soon after Lora's body was discovered, due to the absence of leads or suspects. However, the entry of Detective Paul Taylor into the investigation was set to change the course of events. Known for solving other cold cases, his expertise brought new hope to the investigation. One lingering question that remained was why the officer, who spotted an 11-year-old girl standing alone by the road on that fateful autumn day, had not taken steps to ensure her safety, such as bringing her home to her parents. In 2020, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office created a special unit called the Cold Case Squad. The cold case of Lora Ann Huzar was chosen to have the team reinvestigate with local police and several other detectives. They believed it would be beneficial to locate and speak with significant and previous witnesses in addition to looking through concrete evidence to identify potential suspects. Paul Taylor led the investigation, and although he had no personal connection to the deceased girl, Taylor developed an unusual interest in what happened in 1983. At one of the press conferences, he later shared that somehow this incident was close to him, especially after the loss of his only son, who committed suicide. One day, he dreamed of an 11-year-old girl named Lora next to his son. He considered this a sign to continue the search for the killer. Taylor conducted witness interviews as part of the case to track the story's historical development. This turned up the first suspect in the schoolgirl's murder, something he never would have predicted. The main suspect was a former sheriff's deputy from St. Lucie County named James Howard Harrison. You read correctly. He was Lora's final known living contact. Taylor mentioned that Harrison wasn't under suspicion at the start of the investigation. After speaking with witnesses and the initial investigators, everything changed. He concluded from his research that Harrison, a lifelong law enforcement officer, had a dark past that was not fully revealed until recently. James Howard Harrison was born on April 9, 1935, in Coffee Springs, Alabama, to Nathan and Ida Mae Harrison. He moved to Florida from Alabama in 1945 and served in law enforcement for 25 years before retiring. He was also a member of the Oakview Baptist Church. Mr. Harrison's passing was preceded by that of his wife, Elizabeth Ann Harrison. He is survived by his son, Howard D. Lisa Harrison of Okeechobee, daughter, Cherry Rod Smith of DeLand, and 3 grandchildren, Bradley, Bubba, Kayla, and Kendall Harrison. About 5 months after Lora Ann Huzar's abduction and murder, church members accused Harrison of abuse. The records indicate that Harrison feared these charges could jeopardize his position at the sheriff's office. Seeking to address the situation, he and his wife approached his deputy to refute the accusations. Despite their efforts, the chief dismissed their explanations and demanded Harrison relinquish his badge. Following this meeting, Harrison reached out to Sheriff Lanny Norville to discuss the accusations, expressing his inclination to resign. Consequently, Mr. Harrison resigned in 1984. Unfortunately, in 1983, the complaints Sheriff Ken J. Mascara made were largely disregarded. Mascara observed that his superiors dismissed the concerns about James Howard Harrison, rationalizing that Harrison simply had a passion for mentoring young people in his role as a preacher. This, they believed, explained his influence over the young girls he encountered while working for the sheriff's office. Detective Paul Taylor raised alarms that Harrison might have been exploiting his dual roles as preacher and deputy to manipulate children and teenagers across the area. Taylor speculated that Harrison might have specifically targeted children of undocumented immigrants, who were plentiful in the area and likely to distrust law enforcement, thus less inclined to report crimes. Despite these suspicions, no further victims were reported. After leaving the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office amid allegations of assault, Harrison managed to secure positions in 9 other law enforcement agencies across Florida. His career spanned various departments, including the Brooksville and Edgewood police departments and the sheriff's offices of Glades, Groveland, Hernando, Okeechobee, Orange, and Osceola counties. The fact that Harrison continued to find employment in law enforcement despite allegations of inappropriate conduct and exploitation of minors is troubling. Taylor pointed out that hiring practices at the time relied heavily on the content of resumes, with background checks being a rarity. The reports claim that Detective Taylor discovered later on that Lora's body location in photos taken at the murder scene did not correspond with what the first witnesses had said. It was bizarre. The police had the chance to piece together an account of the occurrence and discover a clue at the time the body was discovered. Nonetheless, for whatever reason, the witnesses' statements were disregarded. Since Harrison was alone at the scene, he was the only one who had the opportunity to move the body before other sheriff's deputies arrived. Coupled with allegations that Harrison behaved inappropriately with underage girls, they brought him to the forefront of the investigation. As Taylor began to look deeper into the evidence, he discovered many holes in the original investigation. Harrison was the only and last person to see the school drill. He was also the one who reported the discovery of Lora's body. However, he was not the one who found the body. That day, two men were working in a citrus grove where they noticed the lifeless body of a little girl and reported it to a patrol officer in the Harrison area. After Taylor spoke with one of the men, they described the incident as deeply traumatic. However, despite this, he still remembered the crime scene in great detail. Harrison asked them to leave immediately after the body was discovered. Strangely, no one had interacted with these men before Detective Taylor showed up. He was the first to talk to them since Harrison. According to witnesses, Harrison spent 20 minutes with Lora's body before other officers joined. Hearing this, Detective Taylor thought for the first time that they had a lead in the girl's murder. The unsettling aspect is that the sole suspect was someone they had never given any consideration to. The detective started assembling the parts, piecing together the puzzle. Why didn't Harrison ask if anything had happened? A law enforcement officer, seeing a girl carrying a bundle of clothes, could assume that she ran away and had to stop to at least talk to her or take her home. Detective Taylor and his team theorized that, with 20 minutes to spare before additional law enforcement officers arrived, Harrison moved the girl's body into a drainage ditch to dispose of potential evidence before forensic experts arrived. Authorities first turned their attention to Deputy Harrison after receiving complaints about his inappropriate behavior with young girls at Bethel Baptist Church in Fort Pierce. Detective Taylor subsequently discovered Harrison's connection to Lora's case by gathering evidence of his involvement. Displaced items were found at the crime scene, and Harrison repeatedly obstructed the investigation. Despite his dark past, he was never formally charged. He was simply fired from the church and left the Street Lucey County Sheriff's Office in 1984, just 5 months after Lora's death. After leaving the police force, he simply took his family and seemed to be trying to forget the past. Ms. Harrison has moved around over the years and worked with 9 different law enforcement agencies during his career. At each new location, he used his position to gain access to potential victims. It is disappointing that, despite Sheriff Ken J. Muscara's repeated complaints about Harrison's improper behavior and treatment of youngsters in the late 1970s and early 1980s, those warnings were ignored. Note, Detective Taylor has solved a number of unsolved murders, including one that occurred in 1974. With all this new information, the cold case detective wasted no time and moved forward to gather even more compelling evidence. In 2021, private DNA laboratory analysts obtained male DNA from a sample taken from Lora Ann in connection with the assault, a breakthrough in the investigation. Detectives obtained a search warrant to exhume Harrison's body in hopes of finding additional evidence. Unfortunately, the male DNA found at the assault scene was too degraded to be compared to Harrison's DNA. However, cold case detectives still had many questions regarding information about the location and position of the victim's body when investigators and detectives arrived. The position of the girl's body did not correspond to the initial testimony of witnesses. So why wasn't this the primary lead that led to the opening of Lora's case investigation? Taylor shared that the investigation took almost 2 years, emphasizing that he always starts his work as if the crime happened yesterday. Interviewing the first witnesses who discovered Lora's body, Taylor tried to understand why Harrison's name did not attract his attention then. I asked them if they could describe what they saw that day because their report didn't contain any details about what they found, Taylor said. After Harrison sent them away from the scene, they were not contacted again. Only now, reopening the case of 1983, has Taylor reached out to them again to see if they remembered the event. There were tears. Witnesses said they saw this little girl lying there every time they closed their eyes for the last 38 years. and it was terrifying. At the age of 73, James Harrison Verkichobi died from cancer in DeLand, Florida, on June 2, 2008. The obituary noted that he worked in law enforcement for 25 years and was a member of Oak View Baptist Church at the time of his death. He was preceded in death by his wife, Elizabeth. According to his obituary, he left behind a son, a daughter, and 3 grandchildren. This finally ended the possibility of bringing it to trial and bringing justice to Lora's case. Although Harrison died before he became a suspect in the kidnapping and murder of Lora Ann Huzar, that didn't stop Detective Paul Taylor. As Orlando newspaper reporters would later write, Taylor initially became suspicious of Harrison after learning that the former deputy had seen Huzar the day she disappeared and was first on the scene when her body was discovered. Taylor was always concerned that Harrison asked witnesses to leave the scene and was left alone with the body for at least 20 minutes before other sheriff's deputies arrived. Joe Vassar, Lora's elder brother, was shocked when authorities finally located the suspect. The fact that cops had tracked down his little sister's killer 40 years later was beyond shocking to him. When he realized the truth about what had happened to Lora, he experienced a mixture of relief and despair. However, this solution to the mystery was a bitter event for the family, especially considering that their parents did not live to find out the truth. Lora's mother, Judy Marie Huzar, died on September 10, 2007, at age 59. Her lovely father, Jose Huzar, died shortly after his wife, on April 29, 2009. He was survived by his children Michelle and Ron Solis, Julia and Richard Cosby, Joseph and Seneda Huzar, and Roald Huzar. 19 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. 2 brothers, Sefrino, Carrie, Huzar, and Raymond Huzar. 5 sisters, Helen, Jessie, Ramirez, Diana Rivera, Maria Monroe, Jenny, Scott, Dufresne, and Gracie, Santos, Rodriguez, aunts and uncles, and several nieces and nephews. They were deprived of the opportunity to see the long-awaited resolution of the case and get answers to all the questions that had been bothering them for many years. This terrific story brings us to the question of how many similar unsolved cases lie in the police archives. Why is it so easy for police officers to escape punishment? If Harrison were alive, what would he say in his defense? Would he have managed to escape punishment, or would the criminal have gotten what he deserved? Harrison knew how to cover his tracks and remain unpunished. It took him 20 minutes, 20 miserable minutes, for the murder of an 11-year-old girl to be postponed for almost 40 years.